Well, Newb Playerson. So this is where you've been hiding out. If it isn't the guide. And what brings you to my little establishment? Looking to run a game. Titterpig. I told you last time, I don't do that stuff no more. I gone legit. Listen, this isn't gonna be like that job in Barovia. Where have I heard that one before? Come on. I am not running cleric for some party of murder hobos again, guide. I left behind all of that drawn-out, granular combat and multi-session dungeon crawls. I left trad gaming a long time ago. What if I told you, this wasn't a trad game? What do you mean? I mean, a game where the action and narrative are fast, where advancement is layered and satisfying, where every roll advances the story, and frankly, if you learn this game, it'll open the doors to a ton of other games of all different genres that use the same system. You son of a biscuit. I'm in. Well then, looks like you're gonna need to learn how to play Blades in the Dark. Do you like crime? Do you enjoy heist movies? Do you have a penchant for gritty Victorian punk fantasy settings full of occultish magic, ghosts, demon blood, and more? Honestly, if you answered yes to any of those, you'll probably enjoy Blades in the Dark, a fast and deeply rewarding titterpig from John Harper, whom I will say is one of, if not the most talented game designers of this last decade. I could do an entire series on Harper's contributions to Titterpigs, but for now, we'll just talk about what many would say is his magnum opus. First, let me clarify some stuff. This video will focus on how to play Blades in the Dark, but learning Blades in the Dark will also teach you most of what you need to know to play many Forged in the Dark games. Much like my Powered by the Apocalypse video, not every Forged in the Dark game uses all the same mechanics, but if you know how to play Blades, you've probably got 80 to 90% of what you need to know down for a lot of these other games, though no promises. Funny enough, Blades in the Dark is actually a Powered by the Apocalypse game technically, but mechanically is different enough from them that the How to Play Powered by the Apocalypse video will only just get you the most basic foundation for Blades. It's like layers of helping but not helping. Also, I am sure you're seeing how long this video is. I sure am.
I've made a huge mistake.
Blades is both a fairly simple system, but with layers of complexity. My goal is to teach you all of the basics to get you into this system so that you can comfortably play in or run it. However, there is no way I will be able to cover all the quirks and details. Don't let that worry you. You can very easily start playing Blades in the Dark with just the foundational rules, and then gradually add the more detailed mechanics and rules as you encounter them, such as how you handle roles for a character who's in jail. I don't want to overwhelm you with too much information. I also don't want to have to write and edit a 2-hour-long video, especially with how long it's been taking me to finish this one. Seriously, bit off more than I was prepared to chew with this one.
You can bail yourself out next time.
I've never admitted to a mistake.
Blades in the Dark takes place in a fantasy setting in a post-industrial city called Duskval that feels like a cross between the fantasy steampunk city of Dunwall from Dishonored and the grimy streets of London from the show Peaky Blinders. The players are a crew of rapscallions who will do whatever it takes to make some money, claim some territory, and beat out the other gangs in the city. It is typically played in phases, though how strictly you stick to that is up to you. You have a free phase full of role-playing and figuring out the job. You have the score phase where you dive right into the action with planning and prep relegated to heist movie-style flashbacks and improv. And you have a downtime phase where players can take actions to heal, train, blow off steam, or work on projects. A typical session of Blades will run through all of these, making the game feel fairly episodic. Of course, there are always exceptions to the rules like this. Speaking of rules, let's cover the main ones. Dice. In Blades, when you're taking an action, you'll be rolling nothing but good old D6s, the dice almost everyone has. You've got a list of skills, and your rank in a skill will determine how many dice you get to roll, and all that matters is the highest individual result. A 6 is a full success, where you get what you were after. A 4 or 5 is a partial success, where you get what you want but will come at a cost. And anything below that is a bad outcome, which doesn't necessarily mean failure. Other special results would be if you rolled more than one 6, giving you a critical success, which is a success with additional benefits, and also if your dice pool would ever equal 0 or less, you instead roll 2 dice and take the worst result. And no, if both are a 6, that isn't a critical success. Sorry, not sorry. Clocks. The second core mechanic of the game would be clocks. Progress clocks, danger clocks, competing clocks, everything is clocks! Trying to break into a bank vault, the GM will make a clock, and once it is filled, you're in. Trying to defeat a particularly tough enemy, they don't have HP, they have a clock! And once it's filled, either through fighting or clever shenanigans, you've bested them. Are the guards out looking for you? Well, if their clock fills up, they've found you.
Stop! You violated the law.
Successes can fill up good clocks, and consequences can fill up the bad ones. Clocks can be filled over the course of a few minutes or over the course of a bunch of sessions. They are an incredibly versatile tool, and frankly, if you take anything away from this video, is that you can and should use clocks in more games. Position and effect. Finally, we have the concept of position and effect, and this is where I've seen some folks get a little lost, so we'll spend a little more time on it. When you're going to take an action in Blades, describe what you want to accomplish, and the GM will tell you your position and effect before you roll. Position refers to the challenge of the action you're taking, which will either be controlled, risky, or desperate. And effect refers to, well, how much of an effect your action will have if you succeed. Let's actually start with effects first, as it's a much easier concept. Your effect is just how successful you can be in this action, which often refers to how many ticks of a clock a success will yield. Effects are typically either limited for 1 tick on a clock, standard for 2 ticks, and great for 3 ticks. There is also sometimes the potential for extreme effect or 0 effect. Typically, you will have standard effect. Shocking, I know. This will be adjusted by 3 factors: potency, quality/tier, and scale. Potency asks how weak whatever you're up against is to what you're doing, like using silver on a werewolf or using a vehicle to catch someone who's running on foot. Quality and tier refers to the rank of your team, your items, and your opponents. If your gang is tier 1 and your opponent is tier 3, it will affect how much effect you can have on them. Finally, scale is size or scope. If there's 1 of you and 10 of them, they have a scale advantage. Now, if all of these things are starting to worry you, stop, breathe. These are guidelines to help the GM decide if they're having trouble. For the most part, you can just trust your gut. I mean, there are 3 main effects: easy, medium, and hard. Typically, just pick the one that sounds right. And if you are struggling to determine which it should be, then consider the 3 factors. Where things actually get a little more confusing, seriously, just a little, are the positions. I've seen some folks interpret position as just flavor text for how hard what you're doing is, and as a guideline for how severe the consequences of a failure are, which is a big part of it, but it's a little more interesting than that. Positions are controlled when the player is in control of the situation, risky when things are more even and head-to-head, and desperate when the odds are against them. No matter the position, if the player rolls a 6, they do the thing and achieve their effect. However, if you are in a controlled position and roll a partial success, you can either succeed with a minor consequence, or you can decide not to go forward with it and try something else. Those consequences can be narrative or mechanical complications, suffering a lesser harm, ending up in a risky position, or having your effect reduced. With a bad outcome, again, you can decide not to proceed with the action or keep going, but now things are going to be risky, so to get what you want, you have to give up that controlled position. Speaking of risky, a partial success means you succeed, but with consequences such as a complication, harm, ending up in a desperate position, or having your effect reduced. A bad outcome means it could be any of those things and often just failing that action altogether instead of just reduced effect. Finally, a desperate position is not unlike a risky position, just with more severe consequences. So we really should take a moment to define consequences. A consequence is, well, it's just a lot of things. It can be a narrative complication, like a fire starts in the room or the guards hear you. It can also be ticks being added to a bad clock, with the severity of the consequence determining how many. It could be taking heat, which means future pressure on your crew. It could mean ending up in a worse position, going from controlled to risky, or risky to desperate, or having a reduced effect. So if you attack with standard effect and get a partial success, that might get reduced to limited effect. It could also be taking harm. Now, harm is Blade's version of health, with each player having 2 level 1 harm slots, 2 level 2 harm slots, and 1 level 3 harm slot. Well, there is a level 4 harm, but that's death. A harm is a bespoke description of an injury or condition, and any time it could affect one of your actions, it will either reduce the dice you roll, reduce your effect, or even require help from an ally, depending on which level of harm it is. A question you might have is, which consequences do you choose and when? And the answer to that is, use your best judgment. A GM might even want to ask the player what they think is most fitting. That partial success attack might have reduced effect, or maybe the player says, no, I'm determined to hit them hard, even if it means putting myself at risk, so the GM says the consequence is harm instead. The GM can also say there are multiple consequences if it makes sense. But don't worry, players, you have ways to resist these consequences that we'll cover once we better understand the character sheets. Otherwise, consequences, done. So, with all that in mind, your typical action in Blades is going to be a risky position with standard effect, often just said as risky standard. What the position and effect are is typically the GM's judgment call, though players can certainly call it into question if they feel it is unfair, or they could take a different approach to change their position or effect, which we'll touch on later. Fortune rolls. One last thing, there are also rolls without position or effect, which are most often rolls by the GM. They're called fortune rolls. A fortune roll is a way for the GM to determine the outcome of something, or how well it goes when there isn't a clear answer. Oftentimes it can be a single d6, but the GM might roll dice equal to the tier of the rival crew to see how they react to something your crew did, or use the magnitude of a supernatural power with uncertain results. The GM will also roll a fortune roll when the players gather information when planning their score. The GM will use a player's action rating based on how they gather information. Are they sneaking around a rival's shipping yard? The GM will make a fortune roll using the player's prowl for sneaking around. Or maybe survey, as they just casually scope out the area while passing by. Using the same 1 to 3, 4 to 5, or 6 scale, the higher the fortune roll, the better the results. There is no position and effect, and thus consequences aren't typically taking harm or stress, but rather just bad, decent, or good results. Okay, we know the base mechanics, so how about we familiarize ourselves with the character sheets? Oh my gosh, so many words and tiny shapes. Ugh! Oh, that's better. Okay, let's tackle this one section at a time. Description. First, there's the name of the playbook. This is like a class, and it even gives you a handy little description by each playbook name. Nice. Your playbook will determine what special abilities and items you have access to, what actions you start with ratings in, and how your character advances through play. Next, your character has a name, and since you are a criminal, you probably should have an alias. Like, my name is Klaus von Hohenlohe, but my alias is The Guide. My look is friggin' fabulous, thank you very much, but you should write what your character looks like here. Your heritage and background are mostly for flavor, but frankly could affect your position and effect in certain actions, so don't ignore them. They might require learning a little about the setting to fully appreciate though, and this video doesn't have time to dive into all that. Now, your vice and your preferred purveyor of that vice. How does your character unwind and de-stress? This isn't just for flavor, by the way, it's actually pretty important because stress is bad. Stress, vices, and trauma. Stress is a resource in Blades in the Dark. Are you in the middle of a job and you want to have a flashback where you prepped something that will give you an advantage? Sure, so long as you have 1 or 2 stress to pay for it. Want to push yourself to add extra dice to a roll you're about to make? 2 stress and it's all yours. Or maybe you can help an ally with their roll, which will only cost you 1 stress because they're the ones risking consequences. Want to roll a resistance to avoid a consequence of a less than perfect roll? Sure, but it's gonna cost you stress. We'll discuss how later. Now, if you ignore indulging your vice in order to reduce your stress, and you end up filling up that stress track, well, baby, now you've got trauma. Plus, your character is taken out of the action for the rest of that score. Pick one of the 8 traumas, ideally something befitting the situation and your character, and that's that. There is typically no getting rid of it, and if you get 4 traumas, the pressure is too much and your character is retired. Harm. But that isn't the only way to be taken out of the game because there is also harm. Hey, we talked about that already. Sometimes, as a consequence, your character will take harm, which is a very brief description of your injury or condition. If you're taking an action like attacking an enemy but have the level 1 harm of sprained ankle, well then if you had standard effect on that attack, now you've got lesser effect. What's worse, if a harm level is filled up and you take that level of harm, it gets upgraded to the next level up. So if you already have 2 level 1 harms and take another level 1 harm, no you didn't, because now it's a level 2 harm. If you have a level 3 harm and take another level 3 harm, instead it's a level 4 harm and you're dead. I mean, unless you resist that harm with a resistance roll or armor, which I swear we're getting close to talking about, stick with me. But for now, know that harm doesn't just go away on its own. No, you need to fill up your healing clock during the downtime phase of the game. Every time you fill that clock, reduce all of your current harm by 1 level, with level 1 harm being wiped away. Next, we've got notes. I'm gonna suggest you use this section to write down notes for yourself, but that's just me. Attributes and actions. Next, let's skip over all this text and look at all these dots and, blades? Sure, that's on theme. These 3 things right here are your attributes: insight, prowess, and resolve. And each of those attributes has 4 actions associated with it. The number of dots or ranks you have in an action or attribute is how many dice you will roll when using it, not counting any bonus die you might add to the roll from other sources. Your playbook will start with some dots, and you will get to assign 4 more dots however you want, but an action cannot go higher than 2 at character creation. Now, clearly these rows of dots are the rating for your actions, but this first column of dots is actually your rating for that attribute. So, the more actions you have at least 1 dot in, the better their associated attribute. These little blades by each attribute are used to level them up, either through training or taking desperate actions. Yes, if the action you are taking is a desperate position, you get XP in that action's attribute. Fill up all the blades and gain a dot in one of that attribute's actions. Now, we'll cover taking actions and all that in more detail a little later, but I think you should at least have a base understanding of them before we move on. So simply put, you will roll your rating in an action when you want to do something or when you are taking, well, action. You will roll an attribute when you are resisting consequences, be they harm or whatever. If you are going to take harm, you couldn't roll Prowl to avoid that harm. You would need to roll Prowess. Just as you couldn't roll Prowess to sneak past some guards, you would need to roll Prowl. Actions are when you affect others, attributes are when you are resisting effects from others. Coin. Coin is how much money your character personally has. You can spend it on a bunch of stuff, or you can put it in your stash, which is like investing it in yourself. Every time you fill up a row of stash, you've moved up in the world, maybe a nicer apartment, and you can improve some of your gear and stuff. Abilities and allies. Special abilities do all kinds of things, allowing you to do incredible feats or get special bonuses in certain situations. These abilities are a big part of what make your character unique from others. You start off with one special ability at character creation, and if you're having trouble deciding, it's recommended you take the first one. Next, you've got the Friends section. Every playbook has a unique list of NPCs with a name and what they do. You get to choose one as your close friend by filling in the up arrow, and one as a rival or enemy with a down arrow. Your friend can be used for bonuses in certain situations, giving an extra die or just someone that can be a useful contact, while your rival or enemy can be used against you, perhaps showing up mid-mission to make things just a little more difficult. Items and load. Next, we've got items. Now, there are the items that are more specific to your playbook, and then the longer list of items everyone has access to. We're going to need to break items down just a little more. First, when do you use items? Well, at times an item might be required to take a certain action. The GM might rule that for your character to scale the side of a relatively featureless building would require climbing gear, or that you can't pick a lock without burglar gear. Alternatively, you might use an item to alter your position or effect. If you want to skirmish against a gang member who has a knife and you've got bare hands, that might be a desperate position, but if you use a blade, then it might just be risky. And if you have a pistol, it might be controlled. It might even give you a bonus die to the roll, but also in exchange for that extra die, using a blade might cover you in blood, making it harder for you to hide what you did, and a pistol might attract more unwanted attention when it goes off. The next thing to keep in mind about items is you'll see that some of them are listed as fine. That's not fine as in just fine, but fine as in
Fine.
When using a fine item, you're acting as if you are one tier higher than your crew currently is. So your crew might be tier 1, but if you're using your fine blades, when skirmishing with them, you are considered tier 2. Just remember, tier is just one of the ways to determine position and effect against a threat, so a fine item is just a nice bump in your favor. But there are so many items. Which ones should your character have? Well, any of them, so long as you have the load. Yeah, so that light, normal, and heavy load, before a mission you don't choose which items you're taking with you, but rather you choose your load, which will allow you 3, 5, or 6 item slots. Then you can essentially spend some of that load, like a meta currency, to have brought an item with you when you decide to use it. Note that items with 2 connected boxes cost 2 load. So if you have a normal load at the start of a mission, you've got 5 item slots to spend, but you don't decide which items until you use them. I've definitely met some folks who don't like this Schrodinger's inventory way of doing things, but it really does fit the style of game beautifully. Also, you might ask yourself why you would ever choose anything but a heavy load to have the most weapons, but in the fiction, having a light load means you can move faster and look much more inconspicuous. Great for stealth. A heavy load and you're slower, and if someone spots you, you are clearly suspicious with your trench coat full of guns and climbing gear. This isn't so much a hard mechanical effect as it is something for the GM to keep in mind. If a player with a heavy load wants to lie their way past security, they're going to have a notably worse position and effect than someone with a light load. Advancement. Finally, let's touch on this last section, which is mostly how to play stuff. XP tells you how your playbook earns XP. As I mentioned before, every time a character rolls a desperate action, they gain 1 XP in that action's attribute. Then you can earn XP for your playbook, that thing up there, by doing 3 different things. If your character expresses or acts in a way that really goes in line with their beliefs, character, background, and so on, XP. That's often a freebie. If your character struggles because of their vice or trauma, that is an XP. This means players are incentivized to make things more interesting by hindering themselves, like a PC with reckless trauma jumping into a fight while injured and without a weapon and getting clobbered. The third way to earn playbook XP will be acting in a way specific to your playbook, so it will be a little different for everyone. You earn 1 XP for any of these things that comes up during your mission, and 2 if they come up multiple times. It's as simple as that. And that's it. That's your character sheet. So we're all ready to talk about your other shared character sheet. Ooh, I tricked you! Ha ha! Crew. Yeah, there is a whole sheet for your crew, which I promise we'll cover somewhat faster. All the players will discuss and decide just what kind of crew they are. It's like a shared secondary playbook. Does your crew specialize in murder, sneaking around, connecting to the ghost plane in order to bring about your sinister eldritch machinations? You know, normal gang stuff. Lair, turf, and reputation. The first thing your crew needs is a lair. It starts off basic, but you can see that you can build and obtain turf in order to gain bonuses for everyone on the crew, like passive money you'll earn every mission or bonus dice in certain situations. You just build along the turf path for your particular crew while you earn reputation and turf, which are kind of like the building blocks of advancing your crew. When you fill your reputation bar, you can advance your hold from weak to strong, resetting your rep back to 0. And if it is strong, you can pay coin to advance your crew to the next tier. It will cost 8 times the new tier level in coin, so everyone will probably have to pitch in. So you see max reputation is 12, however notice that 6 of those blades are gray. Those are the turf your crew has obtained while filling out your lair's haunting grounds. The more turf you have, the less reputation you need to develop your crew, and when you advance, you don't reset the turf back to 0 like your reputation. So not only does turf give you bonuses, but it also means you have to earn less reputation, which you typically get 2 per job your crew accomplishes, plus or minus 1 depending on if it's against a harder or easier tier opponent, respectively. You can get turf by doing missions to steal that turf from opposing factions. Go on, just do it. Crew advancement. You can also advance your crew with crew XP, which is also a thing and unlocks special abilities or upgrades. Special abilities are just like your playbook abilities, but everyone in your crew has them. And you can upgrade everything from item qualities, cohorts, downtime training options, and more. And yes, you can even have crew contacts, though unlike the friend and rivals of a playbook, you just have a crew contact and no crew rival. I mean, every other crew, gang, and organization in the city is basically your rival, so good luck with that. By the way, I mentioned cohorts. They're people that can help you during a score or whatever, where they will basically function the same as an item, but with the ability to just, follow instructions. They can have quality, like an item, and also scope, which can help determine how they affect position and effect. Okay, so at this point, we should have a decent understanding of the basic mechanics, the playbook sheets and the crew sheet. Now, I don't think there's any better way to tie it all together than to go through an example of play phase by phase. A session will typically start in free play. In this session, we have our GM along with 3 players, the Spider, the Cutter, and the Leech. We'll just refer to them by their playbook names to keep things simple. In free play, our players might describe what they're up to, freely roleplay with each other and some NPCs, and so on. Eventually, either the players will have some kind of score in mind, or the GM might introduce one. The players might want to come up with a mission to gain some turf, or perhaps the GM will have someone approach them with an opportunity. In this case, the GM has an ally of the crew mention she's heard about a rival gang shipping something important. Our crew thinks that sounds like a great opportunity for a payday and decides they need to gather some information, which will involve a fortune roll. Remember, fortune rolls don't have position or effect, and the GM typically rolls it. Our spider goes to gather information by trying to persuade a little info out of some folks who have worked with that gang. The GM will make a fortune roll using the spider's consort action rating. The highest die ends up only as a 2, so the informant says, "All I know is they were talking about moving some big crates." Note, it's a fortune roll, so there aren't really consequences for that 2, just some lackluster results. The cutter decides to go intimidate some folks who work around the docks, so the GM rolls the cutter's command action rating and gets a 6. This time around, a dock worker sputters, "They got their hands on this big armored truck. Dang thing is almost bulletproof, so you can't get in normally, but here's the trick. The locks on the doors can be undone with a coat hanger real quick if you know where to stick it." Now that is some useful information. Might even be worth a bonus die at some point. Finally, the leech does a bit of prowling around the rival gang, and with a 4 on the fortune roll, finds out the truck will be moving these crates through the city in a week. The perfect time to strike. Now the crew needs to decide on a detail and their individual loads. The detail is just what the score is about. Our crew thinks, instead of stealing the stuff, we just nab the truck and drive off with it, lose the other gang, and then we've got a truck and some loot. That would make this a transport detail. Once the detail is in place, then every member of the crew will need to choose their load. Remember, this is just determining how fast your character is, how suspicious they look, and how many items they can use in a score, not which items. You pick them during the score. The spider and cutter go heavy, wanting all the weapons they can carry and not being concerned about looking suspicious. However, the leech wants to have better mobility, just in case, and goes light. And that's pretty much it for planning. Well, hey, they aren't picking out specific items for the score, but what about setting up clever heist moments? Sure, they gathered some information, but all the best heist movies have those moments where the players planned and prepped for all the things that could go wrong, ready for every twist and turn. How do you prep for that in this phase? That's easy. You don't. You see, just like your items, you're going to develop those ideas during the score, and I promise, it's awesome. Sadly, you'll have to wait a few more paragraphs. With all that done, it is time to make the engagement roll, which is a fortune roll that determines how things are going for our crew at the start of the action. It starts at a base 1d6 with dice being added or taken away based on your opponent's tier, the use of any friends in this score, the presence of any rivals, and perhaps bonuses for information gathered. Then, roll as normal, and a result of 6 means the players start in a controlled position, 4 to 5 means they start in a risky position, so of course 1 to 3 means they start in a desperate position. The spider uses a friend of theirs, Riven the Chemist, to get a plus 1d6 to the engagement roll. We want to stop the vehicles once they're moving, so Riven will help us create a bomb to block their route, just big enough to cause some delays. The rival gang is a tier higher, however, so they lose 1d6 as well, sticking them with just 1d6 for the engagement. But luck is with them as they roll a 6, meaning they start off with a controlled position. A partial success would have only been a risky position, and a 1 to 3 would have started them off in a desperate position, probably bullets flying over their heads as they rush the truck. The GM says, okay, your bomb goes off, blocking the path of the armored truck and a number of strange-looking motorbikes with people running security around the truck. With that 6, the security members scatter looking for anything suspicious, leaving you with a clear path to the truck and the 2 unaware drivers inside. And that's it. The score has started. Like I said in Blades, you get right into the action. At this point, the players are free to take actions. There's no turn order in Blades in the Dark. Players simply decide amongst themselves who will take an action, or the GM might prompt a specific player if it makes sense that they need to do something based on what's happening in the narrative. The GM will mostly take actions in reaction to what the players have done. Now at this point, I'm going to narrate each action in full and then explain the parts of it, so if things don't make sense at first, stick with it. Here we go. The melee-focused cutter says, I'm gonna get in that door as quick as possible and try to knock them the heck out with my fine brass knuckles, and I'll push myself for 2 stress. Marking their fine hand weapon from their heavy loadout, thus using up 1 of their 6 total item slots, and taking 2 stress as well. The GM says, okay, well, it's a controlled position because of the engagement roll, and I'll give you a plus 1d6 thanks to that info you got about unlocking the door to the armored truck, and since you're using fine weapons against a tier higher enemy, that'll get you standard effect instead of just limited. The cutter rolls their skirmish action, 4 dice in this case, and gets a 5. The GM says, okay, you're gonna take out these 2 guards, but in doing so, you're gonna take a level 1 harm, and the rest of the security force is gonna hear that, so goodbye controlled position. This is controlled though, so do you want to go through with it? The cutter says, I definitely am, so I immediately grab the driver by the collar and punch them 3 times rapidly to the face before he can even react, and I pull him out of his seat to the ground. Then as I'm scrambling over the driver's seat towards the other guy, he takes a shot at me, and I'm going to use my armor to reduce the damage to nothing. I was expecting the shot and came in with my big iron wrist bracers up like a shield as I dove as fast as I could at the guy before ramming him right out the other door. Okay, so first, I hope you can see how different this is from a trad game. This single action by 1 player just took out 2 guards, something that might have taken 20 minutes in other games, all wrapped up here in less than a minute. Also, unlike a traditional titterpig, there is no movement speed or specific amount of time that a turn takes. I've always liked the description that when a player takes an action in these games, they get to do what should fit within a page or 2 spread of a comic book. So, the cutter got to roll their action with 4 dice, 2 from their rank in the skirmish skill, 1 from that info they got from the gather information roll earlier, and they also pushed themselves, something a player can do for most any roll, but it will cost you 2 stress. Hence, 4 dice, and the highest one was a 5, so a partial success. Take note that the GM asked if the cutter would like to proceed with the partial success and its consequences. Since this was a controlled position, the cutter could have decided this course of action wouldn't be the best, and instead they or another crew member could have tried something else. It would just have to be a different type of action. Next, you'll notice that the GM let the player take out the guards with that partial success. The GM could have just as easily created a clock for taking out the guards where the players needed 4 or maybe even 6 successes, though that would have made getting rid of the 2 drivers more focal to the score, and frankly, when you have such a clear opportunity to get into a wild chase scene, why delay it? So, no clock. Those guards were a simple obstacle to overcome. Also, note the consequences for the partial success: 1 harm and a change of position. Our player, the cutter, got to narrate their success based on what the GM told them. The action will completely take care of the drivers, but they still need to address those consequences. So, as the player narrates how they take these guards out, they also decide that it is perhaps too early to be taking damage, so they want to negate that harm by using their armor, which will use up 2 of their item slots. This automatically downgrades harm by 1, taking it to nothing. They could have rolled resistance instead of using an item, but having already spent 2 stress to push this roll, perhaps risking more stress wasn't all that appealing. Notice that another consequence the GM has stated was the change of position to risky as the security forces hear them. The cutter could have just as easily chosen to use their resistance roll to prevent that from happening, though again, a resistance roll comes with the risk of taking up to 5 stress, which you don't want to do willy-nilly. Also, frankly, things are just more exciting that way. Alright, that should cover the first action in this score. Now it's time for the GM to react to this and make a move, leading into the next player action. The GM says, perfect. Your crew has control of the truck, however, that gunshot was enough to alert the scattered security forces. They're closing in on you and will do whatever it takes to keep you from getting away with that truck. I'm going to create a 6-step clock called Shut It Down. If it fills, that truck isn't moving anywhere. What do? The The spider, the mastermind of the crew, speaks up. Okay, I'm gonna drive this thing out of here as fast as I can. Cutter, Leech, keep to the windows or open up the back of this truck and keep them off of us. The GM smiles and says, I like it. How do you want to roll this? Could be finesse to weave this heavy armored truck through the security forces. The spider responds, I was thinking of rolling survey to scan the area and find where I can ramp this truck into an oncoming lane and get out of here. Also, got a devil's bargain for me? The GM laughs. I love it! This thing is carrying valuable cargo that they will do everything they can to get back, so I'm gonna start an 8-step clock called Getaway. Fill it up, and you gotten away with it. As far as a devil's bargain, I think a move this loud, driving into traffic, I'll give you that extra die, but you're gonna gain 2 heat for your crew. This is getting you a lot of attention. Also, this is a heavy truck, and with ramping it, I would say this is risky, but with limited effect. The spider barely mulls it over. What's fame without infamy? I'm down, but hey, any chance I could get standard effect if I made my position a little more desperate? The GM agrees, and the spider rolls with 2 6s being their highest. The GM grins. Well, dang, that's a critical success. Let's do 3 ticks on the getaway clock for that. Also, since that was a desperate roll, make sure to mark 1 XP in your insight attribute. And then, tell me what this looks like. The spider says, once the others are in position, I look around until I see it. One of the security force's vehicles is stopped right by the divider. Without hesitation, I floor it and ramp the truck over their vehicle, laughing as we start cruising down the street through oncoming traffic. And just like that, things are heating up. So much happening, all in one roll. So again, we'll take a moment to break this down into all its moving parts. So, the GM reacts to what the cutter narrated for their partial success and kept the action going by narrating the consequences of the security forces closing in. Had the cutter resisted that, the players might have had an easier time getting the armored truck out of there, likely with a controlled position. Instead, we have an imminent threat, and with it, a clock called Shut It Down, which could have just as easily been called If this clock fills up, the truck will no longer be able to move. Shut It Down is just a little catchier. But the players now have to keep in mind that any partial successes or fails might very well result in ticks being filled in on that clock. And if the truck can't move, they're gonna have a real hard time succeeding at this score. In this example, the spider took action ordering around the other players, partially just to save time for this video. In reality, it would be wise for the players to discuss that a little in the moment, instead of deciding what other players do. Anyway, the spider states what they want to do, a survey action, and then asks for a devil's bargain, a way to get an extra die in their roll without taking 2 stress from pushing yourself, but instead at a cost determined by the GM. The GM offered taking 2 heat, which is kind of like reputation but bad, and can lead to trouble for your crew with the law. A player is always allowed to turn down a devil's bargain that's offered, but the spider was down to put some pressure on their crew. The spider also wasn't totally happy with a limited effect for this action, which would have only achieved 1 tick on the newly created 8-tick clock they needed to fill in order to get away. So the spider offered to make their position worse in order to get a better effect. Bigger risks, bigger rewards. And thanks to all those dice they rolled, the spider got a critical success, upping the 2 ticks their standard effect would have given them into a 3-tick great effect. They are almost halfway to getting away from those security goons. Let's see how that goes for them. You're cruising through the oncoming traffic, dodging between vehicles and the bulky armored truck, the GM says. But soon, you hear an almost demonic roar of those strange motorbikes, engines shooting out strange flames that could only be produced by demon blood, as are the strange, oversized flintlock-looking pistols they're aiming your way. You don't have much time to react, so what are you gonna do? The leech says, my moment has arrived, and if I may, flashback to a few days ago when we were plotting out the course of the armored truck, I noticed a bridge, a perfect spot to set up some remote explosives. The The GM laughs. Oh god. I think getting that set up without being seen definitely gonna cost you 2 stress, but I think that'll make this roll risky standard. Worth it, says the leech before rolling. Oh crap. That's a 3. The GM grins wickedly. As you pull out the remote control for your explosives and try to time out just when to hit it, the security forces see something in your hand and shoot. A red bolt of energy is going to strike you, let's say doing level 1 harm, because the burning energy also will cause your muscles to tense, which in turn will cause you to press the trigger too soon. The risky position will give you 2 ticks to the shut it down clock, but I'll still give you a standard effect on the getaway clock. So, what's gonna happen to you, Leech? The Leech grins sheepishly and says, So, I'm already pretty roughed up from last mission, but I came in with a light load, and I don't want to use most of it on armor. I guess I'll roll prowess to resist that harm by moving quickly enough to avoid a direct hit. Crap, that's 2, so 4 stress, but hey, at least no harm. And, well, as far as that bomb going off, hey Spider, must drive faster, must drive faster! Oh, you should definitely drive faster, Spider, as suddenly you feel a blast below you, and as you're driving, you see the road beginning to crack as the bridge is moments from collapsing under you. What's a heist without something going catastrophically wrong? Frankly, I wouldn't have it any other way. But for one last time, let's go over what happened here. So the GM has decided to present a threat yet again, and to help deal with this, our Leech had the fun idea to use a flashback, a way in which they can spend some stress in order to have prepped something ahead of time for the job. This is a great way to overcome narrative hurdles, or to just get some bonuses without expending an item slot. Plus, it's just cool! The GM gets to determine how much stress, between 0 and 2, that the flashback would cost. Sadly, with a 3, that is a failed roll, meaning the GM gets to have a little fun with this failure, though hey, if the players have ideas as to how things went wrong, I say let them. This was a pretty big move, and so the GM is delivering some pretty big consequences. Normally, a risky position often defaults to 2 harm, but since the GM has chosen to have 3 things as consequences, it seems wise to downgrade that to a much more reasonable 1 harm. The second consequence they introduce are the 2 ticks to the shut it down clock, as nothing was done to actually slow down their pursuers, and finally, with the bridge collapsing underneath them, I think it's fair to say that the crew is now in a desperate position. Now, that might seem like a lot of consequences, and it certainly isn't nothing, but notice that the GM still gave them the standard success on their clock to escape. The crew is making progress, even though bad stuff is happening. That's the beautiful part of getting to choose consequences. You can keep things moving forward even when the poop hits the fan. Now, our Leech has chosen to avoid harm by rolling their prowess resistance, which, as you might recall, involves rolling your prowess, then taking 6 stress minus your highest result, which was only a 2, so they took 4 stress. Remember, there are no levels of success here. If you choose to resist, you will resist. But stress adds up quickly if you aren't careful, and all it takes is a few bad resist rolls before your character fills up their stress and traumas out of the rest of the score. And notice through all of this, we didn't need to establish detailed battle maps or distances or even too much description of the area. Players and the GM are able to flesh out the scene together as they play. Not that there's anything wrong with prep in other games or this game even. It's just that this comic book spread style of action and narration allows your group a lot of freedom. From here, there is so much that could happen. The players might just outrun the falling bridge only to have one of the security bikes leap into the truck and start a fight by the open door. The truck might fall and break down, forcing the crew to either grab the loot and get away with it another way, or maybe even just abandon the score because there's nothing wrong with cutting your losses and running. Or any number of other awesome things could come next. With a system like this, you don't have to stick to the rails of prep, but just have a little bit more freedom. We could discuss actions here all day, but I think we're in need of a little downtime. After every big heist, your crew is going to need to take a little time to recover. By default, each of your characters gets to take 2 downtime actions and can spend a coin to take an extra action. How long this takes is left to your imagination, but typically I like to think of it as at least a few days, probably a week, maybe more. This isn't like some games where you have a long rest over the course of 8 hours, but that's because of all the things you can do during downtime. Firstly, after a score, the GM has to roll an entanglement. This is a roll that is based on your heat and wanted level. Heat, as I mentioned, is like bad reputation. It's attention from people you don't want attention from. The higher your heat, the worse the table that the GM rolls on. The GM rolls a number of dice equal to your wanted level, which you gain 1 every time you fill up your heat. There are a bunch of options, from other gangs asking for your crew's help, to one of you getting arrested and going to jail for a while. An entanglement is a great way to establish a new plot thread that might lead into the score for the next session. And once that's done, it's time for those downtime actions. Our leech decides to go first, choosing to indulge in their vice for one of their downtime actions. They're a fan of gambling, so they head out to their favorite casino to blow off some steam. To indulge in a vice, you roll your lowest attribute between Insight, Prowess, and Resolve. And yes, if one of them is 0, that means you roll 2d6 and take the lower of the 2 results. Whatever your result is, you remove that many stress. Just be careful you don't roll higher than your current stress or you will overindulge. What, you thought indulging your vice didn't have any risks? Yeah, if you accidentally overindulge your vice, you might gain heat, get into some trouble, vanish for a few weeks, or get cut off from the purveyor of your vice. Next, looks like our cutter took some rough hits and has some serious harm. They chose to take a recover downtime action. They have an NPC ally who's a physiker who gives them 2 dice to roll because of their quality. A PC could also potentially try to heal them if they had the right skills, or the cutter could try to heal themselves with the right skills, though that would cost them 2 stress, or 1 stress if they just wanted to roll 2 dice with disadvantage, taking the worst result. A fail fills 1 tick, a partial success gets 2 ticks, a full success gets 3 ticks, and a critical success, which again is 2 sixes, gets 5 ticks. They could also, after rolling, spend 1 coin to improve their result, potentially turning a success into a critical success. And yes, since it is a 4-tick clock, a critical success would fill the clock once, and then that extra 1 would roll over and apply to the clock again. Every time the clock is filled, all harms are reduced by 1 level. By the way, you can spend 1 coin to improve the result of most downtime actions. Our spider has noticed that the crew has gained a lot of heat, so they decide to spend 1 of their actions reducing it. They determine how they will accomplish this and decide they'll sneak into an official building and make sure that some records go missing, and thus roll Prowl. A fail still reduces heat by 1, a partial success by 2, a success by 3, and a critical success by 5. The spider also decides to work on a long-term project. They want to gain an NPC ally within the city government, maybe a lower-level official with access to records, who can help with their heat in the future. The GM determines this will be an 8-segment clock to accomplish, and the spider rolls Consort to begin schmoozing the official at a bar. Ticks are the same as other downtime rolls, 1, 2, 3, or 5 ticks. Obviously, the spider can't accomplish this all in 1 action, so it may take a few downtimes to accomplish. Or perhaps they could spend a coin to get a second action to work on this project, or maybe even spend a coin to improve their result if they really wanted to get this new ally right away. Our leech decides they want to get some even better explosives for their next score, so they're going to use their second downtime action to acquire an asset. They will roll dice equal to their crew's tier, which is 1. A fail gains them an asset 1 level below their tier. A partial success means the asset is equal to their tier. A success means the asset is 1 level above their tier. And a critical success means it's 2 levels above their tier. An item acquired this way can only be used in a single score, so it's temporary. If you want it permanently, then that would be a long-term project. Otherwise, if Leech just wanted to acquire it like this again in the future, they'll get an additional die to their roll for it for every time they repeat this acquisition. Oh, but since things like bombs and poisons are dangerous and highly regulated, the crew will gain 2 more heat for acquiring an item like that. Hope the spider gets that NPC ally soon. Finally, our cutter decides they want to spend a little time training. Normally, that just means marking 1 XP in the attribute of your choosing, or even your playbook XP. But this crew has unlocked a training bonus for prowess, which is what the cutter wants. So they get to mark 2 XP in prowess, leveling it up, and they decide to put another point into skirmish. You can never punch too hard. Now, all you have to do is award XP. Go from player to player and have them answer their XP questions, assigning those experience points as they see fit. And that right there is basically a whole session of Blades in the Dark. Now, keep in mind, you can mix and match things as you like. You could do downtime actions first, then free play followed by the score, and roll the entanglement after as its own thing. You could have a part in your campaign where they do 2 scores back to back with no downtime. Don't feel like you have to restrict yourself to the structure of the game all the time, but it is often pretty useful and keeps things moving along. And that is how you play Blades in the Dark. Is there more that I haven't covered? Of course. But have you seen how long this video is already? And do you know how long this took me to write? Besides, we've covered more than enough here to get you into a game of Blades and running sessions. There are plenty of bridges that you can figure out how to cross when you get to them. And as I've said, you can apply a lot of this knowledge to other games. Want to be magical anime girls instead of a crew of gritty rapscallions? Girl by Moonlight is an amazing Forged in the Dark game that mostly just replaces the crew sheet with a genre sheet. It's great. Or take these concepts, but instead be monsters who are building a dungeon to kill adventurers and you've got wicked ones. Or just Blades in the Dark, but in space, maybe Star Wars or Cowboy Bebop. And you've got Scum and Villainy. I really can't say enough good things about this system. The action is big and dramatic, the pace keeps things interesting, and your characters will always have interesting things to struggle against and decisions to make. So what do you say? You in?